Hello and good afternoon. My name is Andrew Richard Albanase, and I am so glad to be with you here again for the 2025 edition of Every Library Live Banned Books Week Fest. I am a writer, a former publisher, a veteran book industry reporter for nearly 30 years, and the founder and editor of the news site Words and Money, which is also a newsletter, which I launched in the spring of this year with one overarching goal, which is to properly center the work of libraries in the publishing media landscape, because I, for one, believe that libraries are absolutely central to the reading and writing enterprise. And if you think so too, you can check us out and subscribe at www.wordsandmoney.com. For our conversation this afternoon, I'm delighted to host two outstanding authors of books for kids and young readers. Todd Parr is an author and illustrator of more than 60 wonderful and groundbreaking books, several of which are on my kids' shelves. He's known for his bold images and his humorous and inclusive storytelling. And we also have A.J. Sass, the author of several middle grade and contemporary middle grade novels, I should say, including one of my daughter's favorites. She's a skater, Anna on the Edge. Now, I'm sure many of you watching us today know these authors and their books, which have not only landed on many awards and bestseller lists, but also a lot of banned books lists too. But before we get started, I wanted to offer a word about our sponsor, Every Library, which is the first and only national political organization for libraries in the United States. It's a truly remarkable group. They've been working tirelessly across the country to support the freedom to read and to defend the First Amendment, and to make sure that libraries have the resources they need to serve their communities. You can check them out at www.everylibrary.org. And if you can, please do support their work with a donation. Their work is super important now more than ever. And with that housekeeping done, let's get started. So rather than having me do a little introduction for everybody, I thought I would start by asking our authors to talk a little bit about themselves and their work today. And I flipped a coin to get us going. And Todd, you are the winner, I'll say. So we'll start with you. Welcome.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Thank you, Every Library. I'm Todd Parr. You maybe don't know this. My name was changed a few years ago at a school. I walked in and there was a bulletin board that said, "Welcome, Todd Party." And I said, why didn't I think of that? It sounds so much more fun. So you can call me Todd Parr or Todd Party. I'm an author and an illustrator of over 60 books for kids. And how many of you think you can draw better than me? Everyone raise your hands. That is me. I love dogs and animals and things and what I do, and being able to write about things that help other kids feel good about who they are.
And thank you, Every Library. I really appreciate having me here today as well, especially with Todd. Big fan. My name is Andrew Sass. My pronouns are he, him, and they, them, and I write under my initials AJ. I'm the author of a handful of books for middle school and up readers. My debut was Anna on the Edge, which follows a non-binary ice skater kind of navigating that newly discovered identity both on and off the ice. And my latest book is my debut picture book called Shabbat, which is about three kids who go to the same synagogue, but they all celebrate the Jewish Sabbath in a little bit different way. And all of my books tend to feature some combination of queer, neurodivergent, or Jewish characters, and sometimes all three. These are really important for me because when I was growing up, I didn't see this kind of representation. So I'm kind of writing the books that I wanted to see as a kid, but set in a more modern setting, because apparently the 1990s are now considered historical fiction. So, yeah. I also love animals. Like Todd, I have two cats currently and my first ever dog, so I'm getting used to that. And I have grown up all around the country. I grew up mostly in the Midwest and the South. I moved to California in the Bay Area about 17 years ago. And then last year I moved randomly to a small town in Vermont. So I've been kind of ping-ponging all over the country.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. And we're delighted to have you both here. Of course, we are here because it is Banned Books Week. And I gather neither of you are strangers to having some of your books banned. But I wanted to start today by talking a little bit about how things have sort of changed with banned books over the last 4 years or so. Up until like 4 years or so ago, book bans in the U.S. were usually, overwhelmingly brought by one person, usually a parent, through these well-established policies. Most of them were usually dealt with on the merits and somewhat of a quiet way. But today it's these, pressure groups, and you have these lists circulating on social media, and people show up yelling and angry at board meetings. I'm wondering if you can each talk to me a little bit about, the climate as you see it today for authors, and how you feel. Do you feel that it's really changed? Are you feeling that change yourselves in your work today? I guess I'll start with you, Todd.
My book, The Family Book, this is the book that is on the banned book list, has been. This book is probably 16 years old now. And when the book first came out, I was reading it at a bookstore. Apparently, I didn't know this. They had permission slips for me to read this book. And if the parents didn't sign it, the kids had to be removed. When I got to a particular page in the book, was some families have two moms, some families have two dads. And so I had to pause while reading this book without knowing why I had to pause. Well, they come and ushered out one student who, by the time they got him out of there, I would have been done with the book. But that was my first experience of like, what is wrong with this book? That one, they did the permission slips, and two, that this one kid out of probably 50 had to be taken out, which I thought, to me, when I was that age, to be called out and have to stand up and go out of the room, that was more traumatizing to me than it was for me to sit there and listen. Some families have two moms or two dads, which is matter of fact. And, over the years, it's sort of a non-event for me, because this book finds its home. It finds those people that are looking, and the whole goal of it being me is, how do you write a Todd Parr book about families and exclude a certain type family because maybe someone might be upset? That's not how I work. And it was about, like, if kids can see themselves in books and find the strength that their family is just as special as somebody else's, I think it makes them more confident, and they do better in life. And it's certainly what I struggled with, was having books like this where I could find myself in a particular situation, because I was a slow learner. I couldn't read in second grade, and all these issues, there was just nothing that really related to me. And so I think, as you mentioned, these very vocal groups and how it's organized and it's gotten louder, I've been here all along, dealing with this, and it's sort of been exciting in some ways to see how people are standing up for it. And last year, Pink donated with Pen America like 200 copies, I think, of the family book at her concert in Florida. And so these things start happening, and you're like, out of nowhere, I'm like, Pink's giving away the family book. And it's like, how exciting is that for her to do that? A much bigger platform than I have. So I'm sort of just going along for the ride, and like, this book will find its audience, and I'm here to continue being me about including everyone, and just help people be more confident and stronger, especially kids.
Yep. I mean, I feel the same way. My debut came out about 5 years ago, and I think I got about a year and a half before it started showing up on ban lists. And I guess like 10, 15 years ago, what I knew about banned books was mostly that they were classics. They were one-off, and people had a specific issue with the content. Like, I'm trying to think, like A Wrinkle in Time, people were saying witchcraft or something, stuff like that. But my first book, On the Edge, ended up on a ban list with 800 other titles in Texas. I think it was a statewide initiative. And I think they had a spreadsheet, and the reason for the ban just said like LGBTQ. And I was like, there's no way everyone's read all these books. They're literally just looking and saying, oh, this one has a Black main character, it's about civil rights. Or queer characters, Muslim characters, stuff like that. And I don't think anyone's actually reading the content. They are maybe going to some sort of book database and just typing in the terms that they disagree with and throwing them on a list. And I feel like a lot of these people are very passionate about trying to get books banned, but I feel like there are just as many people who are pushing back. I mean, we kind of wised up that everyone needs to be at school board meetings, because if our voices are not heard, then all we're hearing is dissent. And I feel the same way with you, Todd, about your books, is that I don't know if you've had any experience with in-person events beyond the one that you mentioned, but I was on a small book tour with my co-author for Camp Quote Bag, which is set at a queer and transgender inclusive summer camp. And we had been invited to a school in Cape Cod, or on Cape Cod, I suppose I should say. And they had reached out to us. So we were really excited to go. It's going to be 5th and 6th graders. And we were just going to have a conversation about the book and about writing and stuff. And I think it was supposed to be 300 to 400 kids. And one parent complained about it, about the content of the book. And suddenly they had to reach out and say, are you okay with us doing an optional after school event? Which we were, but we had 30 people instead of, 400 or 500. And I can't help but feel like one person kind of ruined it for everyone. Not the kid, of course, but the parent. And not all kids could stay after school. They didn't have rides home. So there might have been kids who wanted to meet us and wanted to discuss, but were unable to do so because of this complaint. So mine was kind of the opposite of yours. You had a kid taken out of class, and we had a kid who managed to change our entire event as a result of it. So I feel a lot of guilt too, even though I probably shouldn't, because I've seen things like an Ohio school teacher had one of my titles in her classroom library and 2 other titles with queer characters, and suddenly she's being put on leave because of complaints. And I don't think anyone's read my books. Like the ones that have the most issues with it are not the ones that actually know what the content is about it. It's appropriate for kids who are middle school and up. And I would hope if parents had questions about it, they would read the books first and then have a discussion with their kids about it. But that doesn't seem like what's happening right now. On the flip side, though, there have been a lot of wonderful nonprofits. We Need Diverse Books is one that I had a personal involvement with. We were trying to get kids' books, specifically queer books, or books with queer characters, out to grassroots organizations in states that were facing the most bans. So there's definitely been some pushback on our end as well. And I think it's also important to say that it's not like a red or a blue state issue here. I just came from the Bay Area in California, and I was doing a talk with an 8th grader for their end of school project about banned books. And I kind of reminded them, because they had said something about, it's like Texas and Oklahoma. And I said, and it's also Danville, California, which is 10 miles away from where you all are. There was just a challenge at a high school board meeting. So don't look at it that way, because there are plenty of people in red states who are fighting against book bans. And then there are things happening in blue states. So it's not a political issue necessarily about that. It's more just that you need to be aware that it's happening, and you need to have the tools and the resources to push back.
Fantastic point, Andrew. Absolutely. It is definitely in every community. Even if you think you live in a state where it's not happening, it is. It truly is. Todd, my kids are a little older now. They're 13 and 15, but we have your books. We loved your book. We had the family book. It was amazing to me to think that these beautiful, colorful, inclusive books would be targeted, that they would be like people seeking them out to ban them. But here we are. They have such lovely messages. Nevertheless, here we are. Can you share some more of the experiences that you've had over your career about how your books have been, loved by young readers and the parents that buy them and check them out? And have you sensed that any of that has changed amid this threat of this movement to ban books?
Well, first I want to say, to Andrew's point, like where I saw most of the pushback was from the administrative level librarians, teachers who had, taken a lot of heat for sharing the family book. So that's what, made me feel bad, was that, a librarian's trying to make a difference. They maybe know that there's a particular student that has 2 moms or 2 dads, and they want to, the whole group to be, oh, it's okay to have 2 moms or 2 dads. And it's matter of fact. And I think when those people I started hearing from administrators, school counselors and things, that's where my heart felt really bad, was for them, that they're just trying to be inclusive. It's not about sexuality. It's like I write for 4 to 8 year olds. It's about be who you are. It's about it's okay to be different. It's okay to be different came about because I had to repeat second grade because I couldn't read. It wasn't until later in life I learned that, I have attention deficit. The list goes on of why I had so many problems in school. So it's okay to be different for me was really about me being different and being made fun of because I couldn't read and I struggled. And, when I started writing books, it was just from the heart about those experiences. And then I start hearing from people about how they use my books. And I was like, wow, I've never even thought about that. That's what this book is for. The spectrum, how many kids have said, parents have said, that we're on the spectrum in our family, and your books are the first book that they responded to. And, it's the black lines, the bold colors, I think. But it's the excitement, in being able to write about things that help make kids stronger, more resilient, more confident. And I think it just makes better human beings. And that's what fuels what I do is I'm writing from the heart of experiences that I had growing up, and I'm using those to say, what else do I need to write about? Because, I have such a young audience with these complicated messages, that it relies on my very simple art style that looks like a 6-year-old and unpredictability and humor. And, the modesty level with me is just over the top. I'm like, I am no different than anybody else any given day. And then I'll read something. And in fact, just what I read prior to me doing this was, defining who I was. And I thought, wow, that sounds pretty good. And that's pretty true. And I need to maybe remember this stuff a little bit more and think about it. And I think, people say you have like one of the coolest jobs to be able to write and illustrate kids' books. I would agree, except for I'm not just doing it for me. I'm making a difference in the world, and from around the world. And when I travel to international schools, the message is universal. And I see how my books are helping other kids feel better, and that's what I'm proud of. And I can ramble too. So just
I kind of feel the same way, honestly. Admittedly, I debuted in the pandemic, so my first book had no in-person events. My second book came out, I think, a year and a half later, and that was the first in-person event that I've gone to. And it's hard to put into words what it means for someone to come up to you and just tell you something like my pronouns are they, them, or I had one person, because my second book has an autistic main character, and the person said, my dad has autism and I'm autistic too. So a lot of the things that I wrote about, especially initially with Anna on the Edge and the non-binary character, that was my first book. So I was writing it mostly for myself. And the fact that it got published was kind of a surprise for me at the time, because I thought, how many people out there are non-binary? And then I found out, well, a lot of people are. And I didn't know, because when I was growing up, there wasn't even a term for how I felt. Now there is, and kids have these great labels that they can explore and kind of see how they feel about them. I've had a lot of people kind of switching pronouns of my readers, just I've gotten messages where they're saying, okay, now my pronouns are this. And I'm like, oh, that's lovely. It's good to be able to explore stuff like that. But it means a lot to me to have kids basically just share things like that. Or my cousin is non-binary and stuff like that. Or my uncle is married to a man. And I'm like, that's really great, because when I was growing up, that was not any kind of representation that I saw. I didn't know anyone, to my knowledge, who was anything other than what people deemed normal at the time, which is still a really frustrating word for me as someone who is on the spectrum and queer and everything else. But I feel like writing is such a humbling privilege for me, because not only am I able to kind of affirm my own identities, but I'm hearing from people who, maybe didn't understand their kids' experience being non-binary and read it, and they said, okay, I get it now, or I get it a little bit better, and we had a great conversation about it. So I feel like writing is just a way to reach out to people, and we might be really different. And I write for kids who maybe have these experiences, but my secondary hope is that kids who don't share these identities have a sense of what it might be like to experience the world through different eyes, because I think it's really important to foster empathy. So I feel very lucky to get to do what I love and also get to share it with everyone else.
There's that word empathy again, which has come up on all of the panels that I've done this week. It's something that I think books are really good at, and that's, empathy, delivering empathy. I wanted to, you both mentioned how you had, people taken out of events or had events impacted. And in June of this year, the Supreme Court delivered a ruling in Mahmoud versus Taylor, which now essentially broadly mandates that schools have to allow parents to opt their children out of lessons that may conflict with what the court identified as their deeply held religious beliefs. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about this and get your perspective on it. And I'm not trying to be alarmist here, but to me, I see this as a very dangerous moment for public education, for culture, for a lot of things. And I wonder what this is going to mean for diverse books in schools and diverse lessons. So would love to get your perspective on this ruling and, what it might mean. Andrew, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it was a pretty devastating ruling when it came out. Specifically, one of my friends was the plaintiff, Catherine Locke, who wrote a wonderful picture book published by Little Brown called These, I think it's These Are My Words, or something like that. It was a book about pronouns, and it was the most gentle story, and it just hurt my soul to think that some parents might not approve of a kid character going around and asking people what their pronouns are, which to me seems like a common courtesy and respect for other people. But in terms of the court ruling, I'm very concerned that there'll be issues of soft censorship where instead of having people challenge the books, the administrators, the librarians will think, it's not even really worth our time. We don't get paid enough to deal with stuff like this, and it's taking away from our ability to teach our kids. So we're not even going to fight this fight. It's just we're going to quietly focus on things that won't attract as much attention in terms of the people who are having issues. I'm also my heart is aching for kids who are in a situation where their parents might not be supportive or might not even know that they are queer or, something like that. And the fact that they might feel shame as a result of that, especially because, and I'm not sure if it's worse having grown up as I did, where there was no representation available, or now where there is representation and kids are seeing it banned and hearing parents talk negatively about. I think it's actually worse now because I didn't even know this was a possibility that could exist when I was a kid. And the queer community has a very high suicide rate, especially among trans kids. And that scares me because the more you affirm people in their identity, the lower that rate goes. And I feel like it's all tied together, and it also creates precedents, perhaps for other things like trans kids in sports and parents opting out their kids if there's a trans kid on their team. So I don't want it to snowball, but I don't know how we deal with this unless we have a different Supreme Court and we take it up again.
Excellent points. Todd, do you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, it's the type of stuff that, the deeper you go into it, the more troubling it is. And you can, lose a lot of sleep or worrying over what does it mean for the future. And for me, it's like, I have to stay focused. I have to focus on do what I can do, take care of myself first, and do what I can do to help others, and not let these things bog me down that are beyond my control. Can I continue doing what I'm doing? And the goal is simply create books for kids to make them stronger and better people as they grow older. And my age group is at that point where, they're not dealing with a lot of these issues. They're just like, want to have fun, and it's a funny book and there's silly pictures in it or whatever, but the message that they take away from it will hopefully resonate. And I think for me is just to stay focused and support, the librarians and the teachers that are up against this and struggling every day about what to do. I have to find and believe that my books will find their way, and they will make a difference, and continue to do what you can do. I mean, what do you do? Do you get mad? Do everybody has their own way of dealing with these things that can be very overwhelming. And for me, I was like, what can this inspire me to write about again? How can I come at this indirectly? What other topic can I do that maybe, puts this more things out there where, you've got to try, like, especially for my books, you've really got to be desperate to pick them apart and find anything wrong. But people do. They're convinced that be who you are and it's okay to be different means something else other than what it does. And it's so simple. And I think for me is I just have to continue doing what I'm doing, hope for the best, do the right thing, support the things that you can, and just hope that this is a time that you'll look back on and say, we made it past that and the future looks bright. I can't look at things any differently. And I think people are overwhelmed with things, so many things as it is right now, that I think you just have to take care of yourself and do what you can do to help others.
I think you make a really good point too, if I can just piggyback on that. It's good to remind yourself that because these books exist, even if they are being challenged, they are getting into the hands of kids who need them, and they wouldn't be at all if they weren't being published. So the fact that we're even getting our books out there, that publishers are acquiring them and marketing them and setting up events like this so we can talk about our books and topics like this is really important, because I feel like 10, 15 years ago, that wasn't a thing that was happening.
No, but just a shout out. You mentioned Little Brown, which is my publisher. Are the teachers, going to just like, I'm not going to deal with this issue. We're just going to not even bring it up. But also the publishers of like, just the shout out to Little Brown to say, hey, we're going to publish, books that help, that maybe are cause concern for people to deal with. But how else are kids going to find themselves if there aren't books out there where they can find themselves and relate? So for publishers to say, hey, this may be a sensitive thing, but how can we do it in a way that this will reach its audience and it will help that person? And so it's important that publishers continue, to move forward too, because they're getting the pushback. They're hearing the same things that I hear, about me. And, they don't waver. They don't give up. They're like focused on what the message is, what they're trying to do, what I'm trying to do.
Totally agree. And, I would just want to follow up on both of that. We talk about the librarians and the educators who are feeling the pressure on the front lines. And we're also, there's significant pressure probably being brought to bear on publishers as well, who are, books that, that they would normally sell into libraries and schools are not getting into libraries and schools because of these book banners. How concerned are you about publishers over time starting to take less chances on these diverse books, and educators and teachers, understandably, who have been on the front lines, who are exhausted, not taking chances on these books? Are you concerned that if we don't step up and organize, that might happen?
I mean, publishing is a business first and foremost. So there is the thought at the back of my mind that, if my books continue being banned and people don't even know they exist, since I'm a fairly new author, they are not going to be making money. And then they will be less inclined to buy additional books from me or other marginalized authors. That said, I too am a Little Brown author, and I haven't noticed that from them. I've never been told to lower the queerness in my books. I feel like every book is a challenge accepted, sort of, let's see how many more queer characters I can put into this book than my last one. So I haven't noticed it from them. And when I do go to things like Texas Library Association or NCTE conferences, I've never encountered anyone that's been upset about it. It's usually educators who are like, please keep writing these books because our kids need them. So my hope is that we'll keep with the forward momentum, and publishers know hopefully that this hopefully will blow over. But if it doesn't, there are so many people fighting against it that, I mean, it makes sense to keep publishing them because we exist as people. Marginalized people exist and their stories deserve to be told, whether it's specifically about their identities or just the fact that they happen to be a certain identity. And that's not necessarily the main point of the book.
I think publishers know that they can't just do nothing. That, I've seen, they're very proactive. And how can we organize? How can we fight back? How can we stand up for what we believe in? And I don't think publishers are standing by hoping that this blows over, even though we all do. I think they're saying, what if it doesn't blow over? Where do we move forward? And how do we continue, making quality books for everyone, books where everyone can find themselves in it, and reach more people, because that's the idea of a book anyways, losing yourself in the book, finding something from the book. I don't think they're going away. I think people are just getting more creative, and publishers will, about how do we get our voice out there, these voices that we see, how do we continue to move that forward? And I definitely think they're proactive and not hoping it just passes over.
I think that's right. That's been my experience too, is that they are in the fight for sure. And they do recognize the publishers recognize the existential threat that these book bans pose to them. So let's applaud them for that and encourage them to keep going. Well, I can't believe it, because I feel like we're just getting started here, but we're already like bumping up against our time. But before we go, I just wanted to ask if each of you had some parting words. A lot of these wonderful librarians and educators are watching this. A lot of your fans are watching this. Is there any parting message that you want to give to the people out there? Andrew, I'll start with you.
I want to say thank you first, because it has meant so much to me to get to speak to educators and librarians at various events and know that they are fighting, because like I had mentioned earlier, I know you're not being paid to fight book bans, and it's adding so much more to your day and your week. And it's probably very stressful depending on where you are, what school district you're in. It can feel like a threat to you, but I've heard from so many educators and teachers and librarians that it means the world to them to get to share these books with their kids, and to hear that their kids either have questions or they feel seen for the first time because they didn't know, this identity could exist on the queer spectrum, perhaps. And I'm so sorry that you're going through this too, but you have the support, like we said, of the publishers, of parents who really want inclusive books in their schools, and then of course the authors who are writing the books. So keep fighting. We are fighting with you, and thank you.
Great. Yeah, I think, the silence may be there is like, but you're on my mind. Teachers, librarians, everyone that's trying to just make a difference every single day, and everything that you're up against and that you struggle with. And it's just because I'm not personally there to thank you. You're on my mind. And whenever I hear anything, as I'd said earlier, my concern is about, not my feelings don't get hurt because someone banned my book, but it's about the person that was trying to share my book. So, and I will just leave it with, it's okay to be different. You are special and important just because of being who you are. The end. Love, Todd.
Well, that is an excellent note for us to close on. Todd Parr, A.J. Sass, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'll add my thanks too to the librarians and educators who are on the front lines and doing the good work here. Thank you both for joining us. And
Thank you.
Look forward to what's coming next.
Yes. Thank you.